Marty, thank you very much for coming to JustMental Talk and being able to share your journey with our listeners. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. As I said, my name is Marty Daly. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. I'm part of the community where I am now. And I always kind of start off with that because, again, as we go into the journey a wee bit, sometimes you become known as the symptom of the diagnosis rather than the person. And what I've tried to do and always tried to see is the person behind that. So that's been really important to me. And I think I've been lucky enough for some people to see that, but it's been a journey, like it says. My experience of using the services came in the 80s, so it's a bit long back. A lot of people came. So I started experiencing certain things probably around about 1984. Didn't know what they were. They were just very, very scary, the things that I was experiencing. At that time, I was married, had a young family, and things were going on the way it was. People would turn around and say, were things bad at that time? I was probably at the happiest time in my life. I was married, as I said, had a young family. I was working. I was very much into martial arts. I had a couple of clubs going, starting my own business, good friendship around me. Things were going well. And then all of a sudden these experiences happened. And the way that it kind of came on me was, and I come from an area where you kind of keep things, whatever you say nothing. Because I had my young family, experienced it when I was younger, being a male, you trying to turn around and say, I'll sort this out myself.
Yeah.
So I kept it to myself, tried to work with it myself, try to see what it was, but things just become really, really bad. But I still kept in the work, still kept doing what I was doing. Was doing the door in a couple of clubs as well, getting into work, but they became harder and harder. But still, I didn't talk to my wife or to anybody around me.
When you say harder and harder, what do you mean by that? What was...
I think the longer you kind of hold back to it, then it starts to overtake your life. Then, along with my fear of what might happen if someone, I felt if I started to discuss this with someone, they would end up with it.
Right.
So I needed to keep them safe, especially my family and my kids with me. But that became, I said, really, really hard. As I said, I used to do the door maybe in a club down in Glengormley, and I lived in West Belfast. So I had to head it out, and it maybe would have took me 2.5 hours to drive the length of the Anthem Road. Because I had to stop the car, had to think about what I was doing, had to move on, maybe reverse the car back. All these thoughts were happening. That's where, when I had to come home at night, it would have been the same thing again. I was exhausted. Just lucky nothing ever happened in the club because I had been lying sleeping in the toilet cubicle. You know what I mean? It was lucky not. But when I come back, this is where the seat comes, because the wife would have turned around and says, geez, you're late tonight. You said, it was a bit of hassle. And maybe I left there at 12, half 12. Wasn't getting in the house till 3. So, but you started to add these wee bits of mistruths on to try to protect where you were and where things were going. So this was happening, as I said, still hold down my job. Used to pick guys up in the van, used to be a driver, pick people up in the van, bring them to places. And I know I probably wasn't the best, but no one was saying anything. And I think it was my background in martial arts, you were scared to say so.
And also, the 80s too was a time when you just didn't talk. Men,
Yeah.
especially men, didn't talk about their feelings.
It didn't say what it was. And I remember this morning, because I lived in Davis Flats.
Yep.
And we were getting a new house. My life, I thought this was our life going to change. But now I have 4 children. My youngest was just over 6 months, and the oldest one would have been about 6. And we were getting a new house because the wife had a bit of a disability. We had a downstairs toilet, we had an upstairs toilet, we had a back garden. All the things you think comes great with it. You think, this is great. But on the morning that was happening, I had an experience, a really bad experience, that I felt I needed to go and talk to someone. Now, it comes from a religious point of view, so I went to speak to a local priest.
Yeah.
So I turned around and says, right, I'll go over to him. He's on the big phone to your man up the stairs. He'll get it sorted. So I went over, I had a word with him, and he sat and he listened and he took on board what I was saying. He says, Marty, leave that with me. So I went back moving. So I had all my friends with me. We were moving house. I'm driving the van, bringing the furniture up and down. Got back, coming down one of the loads, and there was a wee lady standing outside the van. And she turned around and says, "Martin, son, Father such and such wants to speak to you." And I says, "What?" He says, "Yeah." So I says, "Guys, I'll be with you in a couple of minutes." I thought, I don't know what it was about. So I left Emmons, went over, spoke with him, and he says, "I want you to come and speak to the doctor." He says, "The doctor? What's that about?" So through respect, I went over and I spoke with the doctor. And then had a couple of words with him, and he turned around and says, "I would like you to speak." Now, I didn't, at that time, I didn't even know anything about mental health. It was equivalent to me. And he must have said to me, "I want you to speak to this lady." And all I heard was social worker. And she must have come out and introduced as an approved social worker. Now, my experience with social workers, my mummy died in 1971. My father had to wear us up. There were 7 kids, so it wasn't a great experience. And I always says, I wouldn't have them near me. You know what I mean? Their blood runs cold. I didn't like them at all, and all I heard was social work. And right away, I started to turn around and say, "What's this all about?" Because I started my kids, told them it's the issue, and then they turned around and said, "I'm sorry, we think you need to come into hospital." And I turned and said, "Hospital? What's it?" And he says, "Yeah, we need you to go to hospital." And then they mentioned Purdysburn. Now, all I knew about Purdysburn was it was a Bermuda Triangle. You went in, you never come out. I says, "No, it's not going to be happening." Because of the whole change, I couldn't phone the wife, couldn't let anyone know. They turned around and told me if I left the room, the police would have to be sent for me. All those kind of things. There was nobody who could have stopped me in that room.
Yeah.
With due respect, I said I'd go along with it. So the only one I could contact was my sister. She came and right away she bought into this whole thing about I needed help. So I ended up in Purdysburn that day. And I was brought away. Couldn't get back to tell. I said I need to go and tell them, and says no. Wouldn't let me out. Wouldn't let me go. So I ended up Purdysburn that day. So within a 45-minute conversation of 2 years, 45-minute conversation, I was detained under the mental health order.
Detained can always be known as sections, not right?
It's sectioned or detained,
Yeah.
and it was the mental health order. And the big thing about that was it was around about 1986, and the new order had just come out.
Right,
So
okay.
people were kind of flying by the seat of their pants.
Yeah.
Because what I found later on is the code of practice for the mental health order didn't come into place till 5 years later. So everybody was kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So I ended up getting into that up till Purdysburn. And I knew Purdysburn because we had a wee aunt who was in there before. But being brought up and getting in there, there's no gates in Purdysburn as far as I always knew. But when you went in, I felt bits of me had left. Because as a father, I was thinking I've let my wife down. I've let my kids down. All these years of being strong and thing where it's all gone now. And all of a sudden I'm being brought to this place because the mental health order at that, I mean, even now, it's one of the most powerful bits of paper you could have. You know, I mean, the police can't even, it's a law of its own where you have these people can make this decision that you're going in there. So I'm brought up there, and when you go in there at that time, remember it was 1986, so there was a big population still living in there. It was still population. You'd have seen people walking about with their grey suits and white shirts, and they'd have been kind of shuffling about. And at that time, I thought that was all to do with illness, but it was medication. So I was brought up to what is known as Graham Clinic, and I was brought up to the big house, and you're brought in there, and you were brought in, and all I turned and I said, "Where's my kids?" All I had to think about my kids because all I knew was a social worker going about, and my kids needed to be safe. Who's going to tell them? And the priest says, "I'll let your wife know." Social worker says, "But under the legislation, we have to let them know." But I'm up there, and be honest with you, I'm being attacked by what was in my head, but in my heart, what was breaking because all I wanted to know was my kids were safe. Because for all those years, for us as a family of 7, all we wanted to do was protect each other, make sure we weren't broke up, taken away. And I'm thinking, nah, you've let everybody down. You are the disgrace.
Mm.
And that was a part. That was my thinking, apart from what I was being told from outside. And what I know is they went and the priest went and I said, "Oh, Marty's in Purdysburn," and the social worker went and turned around and says, "Oh, your husband brought the Purdy," and that was a complete out of the blue. There's my wife sitting, moving in a brand new house that day, 4 kids. She couldn't drive. We're in West Belfast. I'm up in South Belfast, away up there, near Carryduff, and she left that.
So up until this time, your wife didn't know anything?
Absolutely nothing. No one knew. Okay. No one knew. I was protecting them, and I felt I was protecting them. No one knew. So this was out of the blue. And then when she got kind of things sorted or whatever it is, I had a good friend went down there, helped to get the house all sorted. She come up to visit me. Apart from me trying to explain what it was, why couldn't you have told me? Why could you have not have said? I mean, we together, we weren't kids, we're married, we're happy. Why could you not have told me? I didn't have an answer for that, and I couldn't tell her. I was trying to keep her safe because I felt even talking about it was going to have that input on her. And all of a sudden, that starts to have a crack. You know what I mean? Do you not love me? You know what I mean? You've got to think the human side of this. So all the things that I thought I was protecting, in certain ways, I was taking those blocks down, and on the human side, because all that could be was we're a partnership, and I wasn't being part of that partnership by not being honest. And then again, so you weren't doing that. You were lying to me. We were going here. You were lying to there. And it's not that we're picking bones on it. It was absolutely true.
Yeah. But in your head at that time
was about safety.
Yeah, you were protecting them.
Was about safety.
Because you loved them, you were protecting them.
That's what I felt. Yep. And the things that were the interference that people would class as voices, or people would class as that, I class it interference. I don't give it a recognition. I just call it an interference because it interferes with my life. People go down different strands, but that's for that. And through that kind of journey, I mean, that was the first time I ended up in Purdysburn. I was there for whatever time it took, and all I wanted to do was get back out again. Want to get back out, want to get my life out again, want to get back to where I was, all those kind of things. I've started to be put on medication. And again, for someone who have felt that we're pretty fit at the time and be able to do things, everything started to slow down.
Right, okay.
I mean, and what I've noticed over the years, Carl, is because I've spent, and so I've had a number of operations in my eyes. Okay. First thing I hit was my eyes. Right, okay. So I started to see stars in front of my eyes, and then I was able to read 50-50 vision, and all of a sudden I couldn't see things that was on the wall. So I ended up being in there. But what happened on the human side of this is, there was our life about to start. My whole family moved into our new house and I didn't. Right. So they had started a journey without me where we were supposed to start it together. How did that make you feel? Again, I let everybody down. I wasn't the person I should have been. I wasn't the protective person I needed to be. I wasn't the strong person. And now my wife, she and I became the was holding things together. So we ended up in there for a number of weeks. And again, people will turn around and say about Purdysburn, not Bracken, oh, it's a lovely place, the grounds are lovely and all that there, and it's great for me. But you got to remember, when I went in there, that population at that time was not Bracken. When we moved from the asylum at the top of the Governor Road up to Knockbracken, it started to build. It was supposed to hold about 1,100 people. So it was going to be classed as, you know, I mean, it was colonies. So it was going to be self-sufficient. Everything in there was going to be, I mean, they had their own farms, like got their own uniforms, they had people. And you got to remember the stigma that comes with that was, at that very beginning, you didn't have nurses, you had wardens. You weren't a patient, you were an inmate. That's the stigma we got to carry, and that's it. A lot of people still even see where we are now. And I remember there was because we used to have characters, you know, and now they've turned and say, oh, they have guys ahead. We had characters in our district. We had everybody looked after them, you know what I mean? And we had a character, and and he was no built on him at all, Carl. He had no built on him at all. He was about the breadth of a prison roll up. There was no skin on him at all. But I seen him one day lifting a car and throwing it outside. Serious? You know what I mean? And people would have turned around and said, but that's only such and such. We never thought about what's aggression, that's being bad. It was just that, you know, he was in a bad place and he was brought up to there, and I'd seen him for years after that. But again, these were the things the same. He went in there and never come back. So my big thing was about, how do I get out of here? How do I begin to move my life and get out here? And in there, the only thing about Knockbracken, it was very quiet. So it is kind of quiet. But as I said, when you get onto the ward, It was old dormitories, so you were kind of head to toe, you know what I mean? So you were all in the dormitories. And after about 8 weeks, the section was taken off, and I got home. When I got home, Colonel, I mean, people are turning and say you get out for the day and all that there kind of thing. So that was about getting used, but I just didn't want to get out for the day. I wanted to go home. So when I went home, heavily medicated, still very shaken about what's happening. We've got 4 kids who were bouncing off the chandeliers, kicking balls at doors, and you were just getting agitated and the anxiety was going. No one prepared me for that. No one turned around and said, like, this is what's happening. So you're kind of just finding your way, and people were expecting me to just fit back in again, and that wasn't happening. And even though I wanted to get out, I mean, I was probably about 3 days, 4 days, I don't want to go back in again. And that destroyed me as well. That destroyed me. But I wanted to get back in again because of all this noise. But I was getting up, and those time it was old time antipsychotic medication. So you had dead legs and all those kind of, you'd have stood up and you'd been walking about trying to, because your legs have been laid. But everybody began to take those symptoms as part of the illness.
Right, okay.
So everybody, when they kind of see you doing it, he's becoming unwell again. He's becoming unwell. Because no one had started to educate my family about what to look for.
Did you know at that time?
No, all those things were just all muddled together. So I thought, why am I seeing it? Why am I feeling this? Why am I sleeping all the time? Why am I going? But the big thing about that was what I started to notice was, and then I ended up after about being out a number of weeks, I ended up back in again. So for the next 90 years, I was probably in and out of hospital 4 or 5 times a year for 10 years. But what I noticed was I started to lose myself within family, within society, because it used to be I was the oldest son. And when anything happened to the went to Marty, what can we do? How can we do? And all of a sudden you started to hear was, talking to Marty Daly's not best. Do we talking to Marty Daly's not well? Do we send? Now that kind of went on for a wee bit, and you kind of got used to it, because if anything needed fixed, I used to be able to put my hand to a load of stuff that says, will you come on wallpaper, will you come to turn around and say, oh, we're not going to ask Marty now. It didn't mean about that wee bit, like, you know what I mean? You turn around and say, oh, let them take a ball with that. So instead of me being through the house, we brought people in and do the house. But then I started to feel worthless. I started to lose my self-respect and started to get comfortable in not being asked.
What did that look like?
Well, as I said, I mean, people used to come and not be depended on, but they knew it was there, and all of a sudden it was don't. And even walking down the street, you'd have seen people walking to the other side of the road. And people used to walk past you, and you'd have said hello, and they went, "How? What about you?" You know what I mean? And I got to the stage even later on down the stage where I'd walk past people and turn and say, "How are you doing, Marty?" I'd go terrible and go, "Ah, right, good to hear you." And they'd turn and say, "What was that?" Just to get annoying them. But what was good about even that first or second time, I was still in employment. I went back to work a couple of weeks after I got out, and the crew of people, as I said, we were from West Belfast, and the slagging was unbelievable. I mean, they held nothing back. Like, so even when I got out and turned and said, "You're talking to the big guy up the stairs, we saved to get into this car," they held nothing. And I think that kind of hardened me a wee bit later on. Okay. Because there was nothing that was in the line at. Like, in a good way, these are probably people that I wouldn't have got on with, but I think later on, it kind of helped me. Where other people I thought would have been there maybe weren't. But these ones, there was no malice in it. It was just, you're just open up for it. You know?
And that was their way of dealing with it, I suppose.
That was their way. That was their way, but there was absolutely no malice in it, but there was nothing held back. Like. And then after a while, I ended up back in an hospital. As I said, my life kind of fell apart, became very institutionalized within hospital. And now the hospital had been detained a number of other times. CT, epileptic convulsion therapy, had a large number of those.
ECT, and some of our listeners will know electric conversion therapy, but
yeah,
what is that, Marty?
It's where they would put electric currents through your brain to try, and a lot of people would kind of get it when they would be in a depressive state, and I've seen hard work where people were they couldn't put words together and it kind of lifted them. Now there's still no kind of real science behind it. It came from other places. Well, it'll be another podcast. But again, I mean, I'd got it to try to stop the cycle of thinking. That's what they said. Well, this is to try to stop the cycle of thinking.
Okay.
Because it got to the stage where I became, and I kind of heard a wee bit in your story too, Colin. This is where I came from. Because I came from a martial art background, and my body wasn't doing what it was told. So it wouldn't do what it was told. I turned around and said, well, if you're not going to do what you're told, I'm not going to feed you. So I stopped eating. So I ended up being detained with that there. I hadn't that. It was a number of times I hadn't that for a while. They became very worried about that, and they gave me 48 hours to live before they were going to start force feeding. I honestly mean, and I had nurses coming in, and I was being a bit nasty to them and stuff like that there. But for me, that's okay. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. My body wasn't doing what it was told. And then in those last couple of days, I wasn't drinking either. So things deteriorated very, very quick. And I couldn't even tell you now how I ended up starting eating, but I did start eating. I got back onto my feet again. But I don't think it was through, and even when I was getting the epileptic convulsion, the ECT, I mean, I got to the stage where I couldn't even touch anyone.
Right.
So even when I was getting out, there was no physical contact with the wife. There was no physical contact with my children.
Why was that?
Again, because I felt I was passing this on. So even if anybody touched me, I had to go back and hold them and take it back. I'd made a took a time. I could have took 5 minutes. I could have took a half an hour. So people become very frustrated with that. And even if I was out and a child walked up and banged into me, I had to go and kind of try to touch the child without people thinking I was doing something.
Yeah.
So all my life became this kind of...
You were hyper alert.
I would tell you that I would probably, if I had 2 coats on and sitting and a fly landed on my back, I could tell you.
Right, okay.
I was that hypersensitive to touch the people around me. And that's probably strange, but that's the way I felt. I felt that. And even when I was getting the ECT, I had a member of staff who had to promise me that no one would touch me while they were doing this. Even when they, and fair play, even when they were off work, they had to come in for that hour day I got the ECT.
Right.
And they said, we lifted you off in a blanket and we put you down. Now, I know that someone had to touch me, but I had to believe that they kept it till a minimum. And even with that, we still try to hold on to our humour. Because I remember the first time, Carl, I went for ECT. And the way you always kind of look, one flew over the cuckoo's nest, they lost their memory and all stuff like that there. And people turn around and say, and be honest with you, and this is a thing where I have a good friend now who's doing a lot of research on ECT. It does have an effect on your memory. It does take away a lot of things doing. And what we're turning to say, it's not about doing away with ECT, but we got to be honest when we're giving people that treatment that we give them everything so they can make that decision for themselves. You know, but I remember when I went.
Although, Marty, when if a doctor feels ACT necessary, is someone really in that right frame of mind to make that decision, though?
Well, I still think you still need to have the conversation.
Okay.
You still, or even you bring your loved one in to let them know the conversation. Because what I felt the whole way through this was, and sometimes it happens now, is we have families, we have people who we trust, and we mightn't even be with families, we mightn't have families, but we need to find someone who can actually, and even if it's an advocate, a trained advocate, who can come in and take on board some of that communication and information, so even when you're in a better place and you have a relationship, they can still be communicating that to you. You know what I mean? And you're right, I mean, sometimes you can't take it on, but I still think people have the right to information. And handing someone a sheet of paper and saying, here, read that when their head's going over the place isn't good.
Sure.
But getting back to, I remember when I got my first ECT and you wake up, you don't know if you've went for it. It's a fact. You don't know if you've went for it or you're coming back from it or where you've been. So you just wake up. And at that time, we didn't have any ECT suites. Now they would bring you down to like an operating theatre, they'd put you to sleep. But at that time, I was brought over to another ward. Someone was put out of their bed and they put a white sheet down.
Gee.
And you lay down on the bed and that's what they give it. But I remember getting it and I kind of was sitting there and I looked out the window and I seen my 2 sisters coming up, and one of my sisters would have been really hyper. She'd have been off, you know, I mean, our aunt, God bless her, she's not with us now, but she'd have been really thing. And I remember them coming in. So I turned, and even no matter what was happening in my head, you say, I got it. So I lay down, letting on to be asleep. And I heard her turn around and say to my sister, do you think you'll know who we are? Do you think, what do you think? And she said, just let him sleep. No, I need to waken him. And she went, Marty. And she's rubbing his shoulder, and I just let her over there one eye. He said, Marty. And I said, oh, man, Marty. And I told her, who are you? Screaming out. And I had to fall about that. I swear to God, sick or not sick, she slapped the head clean off me when she found out I wasn't going. But that was about holding on to that self humour. That was a wee bit of Marty that was still there. And that's the whole way through this. I turned around and said, I may be experiencing this, but I need to hold on to this. And it isn't a split personality, but I need people to know that, okay, I have this, but I'm still in here.
Yeah.
I'm still in here. You know what I mean? So through those years, as I said, my marriage deteriorated. I felt they were better off without me because in my eyes, I was going to be stepping off this train soon anyway. You know, and the hospital kind of knew that those things, and even in hospital, I lost a lot of people that I knew were going out and pass, maybe not coming back and all those kind of things. And you were trying to deal with those emotional impacts, but people kept turning around and saying, oh, it's part of the condition. You've got to remember is within every condition, within every data, within every statistic, there's a human being there that we have got to hold. Now, a big thing what we always turn around and say, Carl, is I just want to get back to where I was.
Yeah.
I just want to be, and we strive for that. And you know what it is? Every day I learn, because I was listening to on a podcast the other day, there's a guy up in our place and he's doing a great bit of work. He's not in our place, he's actually has a wee gym. You call it the change. You call it the gym. And he just doesn't look about your it's a whole mental awareness.
Okay.
And he was doing a wee conversation the other day and he turned around and says, when we're not at our best and people turn around and say, how are you? We turn around and says, I'm getting there.
Yeah.
And I says, but where is there? Where is there? And that's something I've always, because Tony said, if you're trying to get there, you're not concentrating on where you are now. You know what I mean? And I know you're always good at quoting things, and this is always the thing that stuck with me with a quote from one of the films. It was Bruce Lee and Ant the Dragon, where the wee guy comes up and he throws him to throw a kick, and he throws a kick and he hits him a smack, and he turned around and said, what do you think? That he turned around and says, don't think, feel. And he says, it's like a finger pointing away to the moon. If you concentrate on the finger, you lose all that heavenly glory. And I think there's nothing more than that quote is because if we're concentrating on someone being unwell, having the symptoms, having all we're thinking about is trying to relieve those symptoms, then we're losing all that person who they are.
You talk about a quote of a film. One of my favourite films is Patch Adams.
Yeah.
Robin Williams.
Yeah.
And one of his quotes is, you treat a disease, you win, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
You treat a person, you win every time.
And I don't think there's anybody out there, especially within the mental health service, who is trying to lose it, but sometimes get caught up in that hole. Because if you look at the definition between recovery within the recovery ethos and then you look at recovery within the medical, it is about the lack of symptoms, it is about all those, but that the recovery within the ethos of recovery is about someone living with their symptoms. How do we live with that? But that's really hard for people when you have a loved one who just wants you back or you're trying to get back into someone. And that's why even around detention, where we have a lot of people, you got to remember even now, Carl, I mean, as I said, that Bracken would have a population, maybe, as I said, 1,100. One time it was up to 1,800 people living in Purdysburn. Within Northern Ireland now, we've got 600 mental health beds. About just under 400 of them are acute beds.
You say acute, what's that mean?
That means when you're going through that acute phase of maybe becoming unwell, where the symptoms are really overcome you and that crisis overcome you, you need to come into hospital for support within a medical staff. So we've got those. So we've got about just under 400 across Northern Ireland. So that's in each trust. All those are spattered across. And if you look, I think it was around about, last time I looked at statistics, 2024, we had 1,000 people who were detained under the mental health order were brought into hospital. And it might have been brought in for 2 weeks, it might have been brought in for 3 weeks or whatever it is, but there was 1,000 people went in. And when people turn around and say, I just need them to be somewhere safe, which is really, really important about bringing them in somewhere safe. What we got to remember is, out of those 1,000 people, probably about 60% of them would be between the age of 18 and 45. Now, if you're bringing someone in that age and you want to bring them in, you bring them in to be detained. The first 2 weeks, you're brought in for assessment. That's kind of, you're brought in under an order where you're assessed to see how and well you are, what's happening. Because the criteria is you have to be suffering from a mental health condition, you have to be a danger to yourself or danger to others. People turn around and say, oh, have to be a danger to yourself, so that means you're running about or something. It could be that maybe a danger to yourself, that you're maybe that most preoccupied that you've forgot to leave the kettle on, or you've left the gas running, or you've left, so you could be a danger. It's not that you're going out to harm someone.
Yeah.
You might be the most timid word, but you're a danger, or you're that much thinking you maybe walk out in front of a car and maybe they swerve. So it could be anything to do with that danger. It could be not eating. So all those kind of things come together. So if we kind of look at that and then we turn around and say, we'll get them into hospital and they've been detained, we've got to look at that and turn around and say, because that has an adverse effect as well. Because once you're over those 14 days, you're now being detained for treatment. And you're meant to disclose that. And this is where we haven't got down to word disclose that. So even when you're going for insurance, you're meant to disclose. So that's have an effect on policy, on your policy. If you're a young 18-year-old and you want to turn around and say, right, that's me better, first time psychosis, I'm not, have no symptoms anymore, and you want to emigrate, you're supposed to disclose that.
Okay.
So that could have an effect on you moving on with your life. If you're, for me, when I was doing martial arts, the likes of trying to get insurance when you're doing that, disclose that. Even a parent turned around saying, I didn't know that guy had schizophrenia. Now, that's the diagnosis. Not saying I believe in it, but that's the diagnosis I have. So all of a sudden, someone gets hurt as they would in martial arts. Oh, sure, you were getting trained by someone who had a mental illness. That's the reason why I had to pull away from it. I loved it, but I had to pull away because I didn't want that to be going. So when we're turning around saying we have all these laws and boundaries, we've got to turn around and say if we were getting someone in the hospital, and this is the most important thing, is get them in, get them safe, because even the families mightn't get a night's rest till you're in hospital, but there's consequences. So it is about when the social worker goes out to do a detention, is about which is the most restrictive practice. What can we do? How can we keep this person safe? And at the minute, we haven't got all those other things in place within Northern Ireland. Even now, we haven't got those things. So for my life has been about this journey of in and out of hospital, trying to be a father, being heavily medicated, not being able to do the things that I wanted to do, and trying to understand where my life came from, and turning around and saying, I want to be back to where I was. But no, it is, Carl. When I look back on my life, and you're striving to be that person you want to be, and you turn around and say, do I really want to be that person again? Is that the person I want to be? Because I was very ignorant to people's well-being. I was very ignorant to people being around me. I was probably very selfish. And even as an old person, I was very selfish. I forgot about my wife. I forgot about my kids, even though you were trying to protect them.
Yeah.
But I forgot about the stress they were going through, because I didn't realise that my kids were being bullied at school because their daddy was a header.
Right.
I didn't realise that they were being taunted when they were going out with boyfriends to stay away from him because his dad's been up there. I had members of my family who'd rather say, when they would turn around and say, where's Marty? I'd rather say I was in jail than I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
You know, so that whole stigma of mental health, people turn around and say, I don't think it's as bad now. It still can be.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll give you a wee for instance for that. we were working along with the Housing Authority, because I now work within the Belfast Trust now. And we were working along with a Housing Authority about trying to open a small house where a block of flats. So this is people who were maybe coming out of hospital, who maybe just needed somewhere to be for a while so they could move on. The Housing Authority had picked a house, and we decided we would talk to the community to turn around and say, give them an up-to-date turn around and say this is that's going to be. So we went up to the community centre, and this would only be 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, to let them know. So we went into the community centre, and the chairs were set out to have it. So I was there from my point of view as a service user consultant. We had a manager of the mental health services. We had people from the Housing Authority who was going to be there. So we went in, the chairs were there, and we said, well, yeah, that's fine. Chairs filled. All of a sudden, the walls filled.
Right.
The place became packed. And people come in because in their eyes, they didn't want this kind of house in their area. And we had really people who were, you had a head teacher who came in and how much this would have an impact on being so close to a school, how dangerous that would be for them. And never did they know that maybe people who were getting into this house, all they wanted to do was get well enough to bring their own kids to school.
Yeah.
So we had people turning, that teacher was saying this, we had MLAs were there to turn around saying, oh, we can't have this in our area because it was a voting year, Carl. We can't have this in our year. And then we have people, just say they look out the window and see our kids playing in the garden. Just say we're walking down. And if they do move in, can we have their details? And will they be in the house by 10 o'clock at night? You know what I mean? So
That's only 6 years ago.
no, I mean, people turn around, and then we turn around, and then there was a gentleman stood up, and he turned around and said, I live beside one of these facilities, and I've never had any issue. They near pulled him apart. They said, oh, that's been set up. Oh, you wheeled him in. And I can understand the fear, and I can understand kind of because of your having educated yourself in. But what got me, and it was heartbreaking, to be honest with you, because what they were talking about was, oh, they move in, the prices of our houses are going to go down. If they move in, we won't be able to have people, we won't be able to bring our families around. But what really got me was, I'm sitting there and turning around saying, please don't let there be a member of their family sitting in the house tonight going, I need to talk to someone. I need to let someone know what's happening in my head. And then them's walking and going, oh, I was show them tonight, but we're not having any of these. You know what I mean? That's what got me, because there could have been their children, their husband, anyone sitting there, turning around, and what I was going through and turning and said, no, I need to let someone know. And then they hear all this and they go, how can you have that conversation with someone? Or if later on in life, one of their kids or one of them's becoming well, after having this conversation, we're keeping them to, how would they have the courage to turn around and say there's something wrong with me?
Yeah.
You know, and this is what it is. It's about this open conversation. Mental illness is bad, but there's other kind of conditions that's really bad. But why is it so bad that we can't talk about mental illness? Why is it so bad? And even when I think the medical service need to get better, because if you went into the hospital and say you were getting OCPD or you had cancer, they turn around and say, would you like to speak to someone? Sometimes you go in, you're hit where there's a bipolar or all this here, and saying, right, we'll get you on medication. No one's sitting and explaining it to you. Yeah. And that's why it's important about the podcast that you're doing today. I'm not saying that it's a walk in the park, but it is livable. Even though I wanted my way out of it, and people would turn around and say, that's taking our lives through suicide. I live with that thought every day.
Still now, Marty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a safe hold for me.
What do you mean by that?
Because for a long time, I wasn't allowed to make decisions. So decisions were made for me through this mental condition. And what I felt when I started to get back onto my feet, and it was through other people who had conditions with me. But I try to say, if I'm going to make a mistake, then I'll make the mistake, but I'll take the consequences for it. I'll be able to say, it was me. It wasn't this. Marty Daly made those. So what I do, and as I said, I mean, at the minute, today, tomorrow, but I suddenly say, is this a day that I'll leave this earth, or can I get through another day? Because, I mean, I have a very great belief in God. Other people have their beliefs, and I know it wouldn't be right, but I have a great belief. But I turn around today, I've decided that this would be an hour day, but that's been my decision. And if I decide to do that, that'll be it. Then people turn around and say, that's not right. But you got to understand is, I have lived this longer than I have lived without it. And the things that I do, the things that I say, the things that people see me doing is my norm. So when I'm going through a crisis, people turn around and say, you shouldn't be going, that's not normal. No, it's not normal for you. It's normal. Ask me what my normal is. Because we judge everybody on ourselves. You know what I mean? So it's get to know the person and find what their normal is. So if that person gets up and doesn't sleep, I mean, people turn around and say, oh, I need me 8 hours sleep. And someone turns around and says, oh, I only sleep 1.5 hours. I go, geez, that's not normal. You need to go see a doctor. No, that's for, I've always only had 1.5 hours. You know what I mean? So what is the normal for you? And I think that's where we need to turn mental health on its head. It's about turning and say, what's normal for this person? Now, there is a time when that crisis becomes really outstanding and they will need people to come around them. And that's why it's important that you put together your well-being plan, because do you know what my life began to change? Because every time I went into hospital, Carl, I've seen people who were in the same crisis as me. I've seen people, but were trying to get on their life, but they were in a crisis. Then
And throughout that, Marty, before I come on to just when you're like, when did you get a diagnosis throughout that time?
I had a number of diagnoses.
Right, okay.
I had a number of diagnoses, because even when I had been brought in front of a panel of a number of doctors, none of them could agree what it was.
Right, okay.
So at the moment on my file, it would say I am a paranoid. I have the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. I'm clinical depressed, and because of some of the things I do that I said about the touching and bringing back, I have OCD. So depending on what day you get me, that's where a lot of my symptoms would be around those kind of things.
Paranoid schizophrenic, I mean, it's one of those diagnoses too, Marty. You hear often, and the unfortunate thing is you hear it often in the news when it's associated with, and going back to that stigma associated with certain crimes being committed, murder, those type of things, and someone claims this and oh, that they were paranoid. So that in itself adds to that stigma you were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and you got to remember, is even the language, I mean, even when we're talking about suicide, I mean, there was a great campaign, and 100% great campaign about the language of how you report suicide and how you talk about suicide. So they had to take certain things out. So now when someone has died through suicide, it has to be, it could be sudden death or whatever it is. If you find that someone has done a crime, Marty is a paranoid schizophrenia. And that's why I say it's really important that you know that Marty is a father, a grandfather, because again, we still allow the media to make those. That's what that definition of Marty is a paranoid schizophrenia. And we have not worked enough for media to turn around and say, no, that needs to stop, because there may have been a crime, sort of. But was that the symptom of what they were doing? Or like I said, was that Marty Daly? If someone was turning around and saying, someone attacked your family and come to your house and doing something, and I needed to protect my family, and I walked out, and I'm sorry for saying this, he had to be punched in the mouth. Was that a paranoid schizophrenia? Or was that a protective father? But no, he's off his head. So we've got to turn around and say, what are those? And again, even the likes of solicitors now would be turning around and say, you've got to, we'll work on that. You know what I mean? They fall back to that. But it's about turning around and saying about how do I take that responsibility? Because some things are done through mental health, but we've got to have that conversation about what that is. Not everything comes down to that, where we need to be.
And that point too, Marty, and when those times you're in a hospital, that acceptance of that you were not well, did you have that acceptance within yourself?
And this was another point, was I knew things weren't right, but I wouldn't have classed it as being that well.
Okay.
I knew I was under attack, but that was probably a safe place for me to be. But I still don't accept my diagnosis. And what happened for a long time was I had a great, when I had a psychiatrist, and they retired, and then a young psychiatrist came in who went on to be one of the biggest minds, and probably what I think were in psychiatry, about how they've changed ways of thinking. Was for a long time he was telling me this is why he came to that decision. So he was trying to tell me he couldn't prove to me that I had it. I couldn't prove to him that I couldn't have it. But because when I couldn't prove to him I was delusional, but I couldn't say to him, no, you're delusional. You know what I mean? So the language, again, is really, really important. He couldn't prove to me and I couldn't prove to him. So for those years, we battled those out. And I think one day, and it was good for him to turn around and say, do you know what it is, Marty? Well, we got to know each other. Turn around, you know what it is, Marty? You're never going to, I know that you have this, but you're 100% adamant that you have this. But you know what it is? It's having a really bad effect in your life.
Okay.
It's causing you grief. It's causing you pain. It's causing you not to be the father you want to be. So let's concentrate on the problem that's causing, and let's deal with the problem rather than where it's coming from.
Okay.
And that was a kind of flip of so now it's not about words, but what is it causing in your life? So I couldn't do certain things because of this. How can we work around that? What's a workaround? You know what I mean? And that's why I kind of think about where we go, because for a long time, I wanted to go into the town. I couldn't go into the town because all I could think was town's packed and people will bang into me and they'll touch me and what'll happen there. And then I sat one day and I turned and said, okay, you want to go into town? But who said there needs to be people in the town? So I sat one day and I turned and said, well, do you want to go into town? So I went into town about 3 o'clock in the morning and no one was about.
Right.
I won because I got into town. And then later on, I started to go into maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock. I allowed people to come into town with me. So people were coming to work different times, but I called the shots. And for me, that was stupid thinking, but for me, that was a win-win. You know, and then I started to win when people were there. This touching thing was a big thing, Carl. And as I said, I mean, I was probably known by every security man down that town because I didn't look the part. I mean, I was walking in, I was touching things. There was probably cameras all over the place, and they were probably going, there's your man down there again. And I remember walking in, I don't know if you remember, it used to be the gadget shop in the town. I remember walking into the gadget shop, and the two security men followed me right away, followed me around the shop. And while they were following me, I seen this guy walking, and there was like this big kind of clock on the wall. And they're watching me, and I seen this guy lift this clock off the wall, put it up his coat, and walk out. And I said to myself, sir, you right, you shouldn't have doing your job. He just walked out the door, and there was
They were too busy watching you.
They were too busy watching me, and I was at alert. I seen your man doing it, but they were too busy watching me. So as I said, I mean, in the humour, you can kind of think back, and even at that time, I was laughing. But those are the things that kind of get you through. And that's the wee bit of Marty Daly that I like, is that bit of humour and that bit of understand and that bit of fun. And it was only when I started to meet other people, because I say, I mean, I was I got out of all these years and I had to go through tribunals to get out of hospital.
Okay.
And so I had to go through a tribunal to get out of hospital, and the doctor says, they got out. The doctor was agreement that I needed to get out of hospital, but he couldn't take the chance of allowing me to go out because he felt I wouldn't last.
Yeah, the risk to yourself.
I'd be gone. So he helped and supported me to get the tribunal, give me a name of solicitor, help me, but there's no way he could put his name on the form. So the tribunal made the decision. So a mental health tribunal is like a small court. So when you go in, you have a chairperson, you have a psychiatrist there who would be independent, and you would have a lay person, and they kind of ask some questions. So they'll question your medical team, why is this person in, why are they there, and they'll kind of question why you need to be there. And at the time is about, is this person at this present moment in time still fall under the criteria of being detained, and if they don't, then they need to be out. So I got out of hospital, and I'm still being seen by mental health services and getting out of hospital, and I got part of a group that was called Community Links. It was put together, and what this was just people who needed just to get out of the house, and they would have come and would have went out and went for walks and went for coffee, and then I met other people who were going through the same thing. But what we felt, I mean, most of us were men. Most of us were men. I was a young fella. Most of us were men, but we were going into little cafes and they were turning and saying, right, when you go and get a coffee, get a receipt. You're going, I'm not going into the hospital for a receipt for a cup of coffee. And we started to bring it, so, because this was a pilot, and what the pilot was, at the end of it, they turned around and says, did it work? They said, it did work, but what do you think could have been better? So we turned around and said, that out receipt thing needs to go out the window. We want to go into a bar. Oh, we can't go into a bar because you might start drinking, but she wants to stop us drinking when we leave you and walk out. You know what I mean? So we want to go and play a game of pool, all those kind of things. So we turned around and put that together, and we sent it in, and then the person in the back says, great news, we've got the funding for it, brilliant, but you're not allowed to do A, B, C, D. All the stuff we said we wanted to do. Said, no, we're not having that. We want to go and we want to bring this forward to the head of the trust and have a conversation and see why we can't have it. So we all decided, we got a small group together, that we were going to go forward with it. And on the day, the only one turned up was me. So then, and I brought all the thoughts forward, and the attorney said, that's really way to do that. We're starting to, because on that time we were just having Section 75 about people being involved in services, having the right to the proper services. At that time it was the North and West Trust. We hadn't got to the Belfast Trust yet. So they turned around, they were starting a small group. There's a group called LAMP, Life After Mental Health Problems. And it wasn't that you've got better, but you've got a life along with your mental health problems. And I went to that. There was a lady there, Margaret, and she facilitated the group, but she always knew she was going to hand the group over. I go to some groups and turn out this is my group. She always knew that this group was going to stand on its own. So she gave us all the power and all the courage to be able to come a group on our own. And she brought us down to see a group down in the Foyle area, Derry, Londonderry. And they were an advocacy group, a service user group, and we met with down them. And so, no, it was great. When they walked in, they turned around and asked the Margaret, and she knew it was going to happen. Professionals step outside, had nothing to do with them.
Right, okay.
And we just spoke as service users. And we put together there, and then we brought that model up to LAMP, and we started our own kind of service user group there, having an input on all what was happening within the services, which I think we need to get back to where we are now. And then we've done like a small advocacy service. And what was really funny about that time, Margaret would have said to me, do you want to come up and we'll see what people might want in the hospitals? So when we started to go up into the hospital, and I had been with her, and she had been standing there. And when we had brought issues, did it talk to her and not talk to me?
Right, okay.
But she'd have said, hold on, we stand there. And I said, oh no, but you're the monitor. No, that's the advocate. So we got through that. But from that going down to the Foyle area, I didn't know that there was a bigger explosion of service user involvement happening across the island of Ireland.
Right, okay.
So I started that in May. I got involved with LAMP, which was my lifesaver. We service user involvement with the project of LAMP. We were the first service user to do peer advocacy. We got trained in peer advocacy. Trust paid for that. We were the first group to have a contract with a health trust as peer advocates. And then we opened our own office down in Rosemary Street,
Right, okay.
where people could drop in and be able to get things seen till, and that kind of just blew. But from that area, I was asked that I want to be part of starting a service user movement. And we went down.
Service user now, I mean, service user now is a new term for patient. When we talk about language, isn't it? Or?
Well, yeah, but again, I mean, even me, I was saying I'm now going towards citizen. And this is another thing about language is people turn and say, what do you think people need to be called? Can we call them by their first name? Because you could get into a whole debate about service user, survivor, victim of mental health, all those kind of things. So this was what class of service user movement. People mightn't agree with it, but this is where it was. So we were going to have an All-Ireland conference. And at that time, the Celtic Tiger was going good. So within the north of Ireland, they didn't have money, but they're down in the south, they give us the money. And each trust, to be honest with you, for that conference, contributed. And what we done was we had it in Derry, Londonderry, and brought service users from all parts of Ireland for 3 days. We paid for them for 3 days, put them up in hotels and hostels. Whole 3 days, brought over inspirational speakers from all different parts of the world, and they came and they talked for those 3 days. And on the third day, we invited the trusts and health authorities from down the south and told them what we thought. And that was a great of how we started. And from that day, on that night, we started the Irish Advocacy Network. Now, to be honest with you, Colin, I had no intentions again. All I wanted to go down and stack chairs and show people about. But all of a sudden my name come up and I was now part of this committee of being part. And that opened my eyes as well. I couldn't understand why people would want me. What was the reason behind that? And through that, the Irish government asked the Irish Advocacy Network, would they go in and assess all their mental health facilities across the south of Ireland. And that was an experience. We got a team, we went in, they told us all what they wanted to see. We had access. Now, again, I went to some facilities where we had staff stood outside with their arms wide and said, you're not getting in here.
Right, okay.
We had a phone that went straight to the Department of Health. All we had to do was phone my hand, my phone and says, get out of the way. So they tried to move away. We got really minimum help from them. It was like RQI getting in.
Right, okay.
Every week we were getting in as service users. And we looked and put together, and that's how a lot of their things moved on, because they were really still in the old asylum as
Right, okay.
service user, and even from us, we were starting to move across. So that's where I got involved with that, but very much about Belfast. How do we begin to change Belfast? And again, the service user group being involved with Southeastern Health Board. They were very much about service users being involved. And at that time, within the North and West Trust, we had a co-director called John McGowan. And he was very much about community orientated, because he was about getting people out of nutbracking, and what he felt was that time was, you know, I mean, if we're really going to take service user and care really, really serious, then we need to have a job that has a level of responsibility that people will see. It won't be just someone coming in. And that's where this job as a service user consultant came from. They put that together when it became the Belfast Trust. They put that together. And what that job title at that time was under a 3 year. It was only for 3 years temporary. And if it worked, then they would expand it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this job came from in 2009. But all that time, I still was experiencing the self-loathing of myself. When I took up the service user involvement, I had to have conversations with my kids to turn around and say, this is things that I'd be doing. And they were very much in agreement with it. But I have to be careful, because I need to tell my story and not tell their story. I got a better understanding of what families are really going through, how they're hurting. I work along with cause and praxis at that time, and CURS. And when you know yourself, Colin, I don't know, when you're doing kind of voluntary stuff, because we were voluntary, nobody in LAMP got paid. You were 24/7. I mean, I have people coming to my door at all hours of the morning, because I sit my community. People started to see me differently again.
A positive way?
Positive,
Yeah.
positive, because they would have came and kind of see it. But it still hurts to know that those same people are maybe seeing someone who I am, who was then, and they're still having that same thought pattern. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is, what do we do? Is this podcast going to make a difference? Is what we do going to make a difference? Because without cultural change and understanding come from all that, it just doesn't sit within mental health. It sits within our community. Because I felt, it's not that my community abandoned me. I felt that they just gave me a wide berth.
Okay.
They didn't see me as a father anymore. They didn't see me as a person I needed to be. And probably I needed that.
Is that down to education too, though? That people, you know, when people don't know about something, or they don't know of something, or they don't know, it's fear.
Of course it's fear. Of course it's fear. And it's a lack of education. But sometimes you have to have empathy to someone in pain. Because from your experience, Carl, mental illness brings us as much pain as a really sharp sword. And no one sits and talks with us about that pain.
I would say it's torture.
It's
torture.
Yeah, it
Actual
is.
torture.
It is, because again, even with the likes of medication won't take it away. Chemicals won't take it away completely. Chemicals don't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Medication works for a lot of people, and what I would say is that, I mean, I've advocated for people that medication really has its place, but it's about how we approach people within mental ill health, and helping them to have an understanding of it, because I am also part of the Hearing Voices Network.
Okay.
Which is about across, and we would have kind of 3 stages of hearing voices. So you have that starting stage when the voices start to come, and I go in there to start the stage, because sometimes this interference would hear things about me, and it uses it against me. So that starting stage is about where you're just a rabbit in the headlines, not knowing, and then even people saying to you, what's wrong, what's happening, you can't tell them, you don't know.
So Hearing Voices Network, that's for people who would be
Experience.
diagnosed or
Well,
diagnosed
not
with.
even.
Okay.
It's about people who, because there's a large number of people who experience voices who have no diagnosis whatsoever, who wouldn't be seen by the mental health services.
Okay.
And we've got to see, well, what's the difference there? But again, what that is about is just even helping the people, no matter where it's coming from, even with their own medication, is about how do we help them to understand what that voice is? Because some people might experience a voice that has been torturous to them. It might have been an abuser. It might have been someone who's been good to them. I know people have a great relationship with their voices.
Okay.
I'm just in an abusive relationship.
Okay.
I'm in an abusive relationship. I don't get on with the voice. I know what it is. It's very abusive, but I have no hostel to go to. So I have to learn how I control it. But I know some people get on very, very well. So we have to help them to understand that. Next one is about how do we get that organizational stage, about how do we help them to organize? How do we make that difference between the voice and other things? Because I would also experience a lot of intrusive thoughts,
Okay.
which sometimes can become clarity with it of experience and voices as well.
What's the difference between a voice and an intrusive thought?
Well, for me, I mean, my voices are on the outside, so I hear the way you're talking to me now. I also have someone here standing beside me trying to say something else.
Okay.
So if you can notice me, I'm probably staring at you an awful lot to concentrate on you, because I don't want the things to be said what's not being said. So, but an intrusive thought is about maybe sudden being. You think maybe sudden thought. Say for instance, you're walking down the street and there's an elderly lady coming down the other side on a walking stick, and you turn around and say, "What about happened? I walked up and kicked that walking stick from underneath him." Right? And then you turn around and say, "That's a stupid thought," and walk on. But where intrusive, it stays there, and you go, "Why do you think that? What was the reason behind that?" And you start to pick and pick and pick, and all of a sudden it's about a intrusive thought here, intrusive thought, and it starts to pick away at you. And it's about helping. Intrusive thoughts is about how do we help that thought to come in and go out, because it is a thought,
But
but it's having an impact on your life.
And it's very disturbing.
It's very disturbing because
you're picturing those thoughts. You're picturing what happens if that happened. So it's really disturbing.
And then you're going, well, why would you even think that? You start doubting yourself.
And you feel, for me, it's a case of that's how bad a person I am, because I'm thinking that thought.
Yeah.
Any normal person, if you want to put, if whatever normal is, but any normal person wouldn't be thinking that.
Yeah.
And therefore you feel I'm the problem.
But if you had an intrusive thought of winning the lottery and turned around and saying, "I'd buy a house," you live with it. You go, yeah. But it's the same capacity, but they're on two different dreams. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Those are those things. But with the hearing voices, when we get down to that organisation, it's about organising about what do we need to do, because that, as I said, I mean, I know people who might have 5, 6, 7, 8 voices. I'm probably already have one, but it's a bad one. And then we turn around and say, well, how do we do that? The way you maybe even do where someone maybe have 4 or 5 is about, do you know, when we used to be younger, when we learn martial arts, to turn around and say, "Go for the ringleader."
Right, okay.
You know what I mean? So you might have two voices that are there, and they're kind of just saying things, but they're not annoying you. Turn around and say, "Don't like to worry about them." Might have another one who's kind of having a wee bit and turn around and say, "Well, what I need about them." And then you turn around and you have the main one and the main two, and you turn around and say, "Okay, how do I deal with that? How do I get through my day and do with that?" And I used to be where I had to turn around and give them their time through the night. So I had to turn around and say, "Let me get through my day without a contract, and then get through the night we need to be." So that's when we get on to the stabilisation. It's about how do I stabilise this so I can get on with other things in my life? How do I begin to move along? And I know, Carl, for the short time, I'm probably throwing lots of things all into the mix, but I'm just trying to give you a thing of where my life has been with that. And I live where the interference or where that needs to be. The Hearing Voices Network has been very, very popular to me and very supportive to me. Medication has had its part in its life as well. But again, where I was as an advocate was about turning around and saying, we have to have a balance, because if we're giving people loads of medication and under their recovery that you're symptom free, but you haven't got a quality of life. You know what I mean? Symptom free, you don't have a voice, but you can't get out the door because you're tired. You can't get up in the morning. You can't make it out. We need to get a balance, because again, what happens is your self-worth deteriorates away. And for a long time, even when I was doing this kind of work, I lived with a lot of guilt, because I seen that my life was probably in a better, because lots of people don't even like the word recovery. Saying, "I don't recover, I'm not recovering." So it's getting that. So what's better for you? So I had a lot of guilt where maybe I was going up to hospital advocating, and people I had been in the hospital for were still there. We're still going through. And I'm trying to say, well, how did I get a chance? And they haven't got a chance. What's been that difference? What made a difference for me? It hasn't made a difference. But I didn't realise where they are was their recovery. It mightn't have been, again, normal and non-normal. That was their recovery, because they might have been in hospital, but they were doing things, they were getting on, they maybe having conversations, they were able to write a letter, they were able to go for a walk. That was their recovery. And it's about, sometimes you have to check yourself. Sometimes, and again, our peers are very good at checking us with that and turning around and saying, no. You know, again, and that's what I think, when we walk in this world of mental health and recovery, it's about And that's why this is my story, and what worked for me mightn't work for everyone. But we have a great opportunity and a great privilege. I have sometimes of walking with people.
Okay.
And that's why I think peer support is really important. May that be peer support and a peer support worker. I think there are two separate things as well. Having an understanding of someone and not being judged. Because I've sat with you today and I've said things and you're probably just accepting and you're going along with it. Some of the things I could say to you, what's going on in my head, if you come from a professional background, you're turning and saying, I need to do something about that. But do you really? Did someone really need to do something about that day when I was first detained? Did someone need to say, no, we need to get you into hospital? When if they says, what have you done for the last 2.5 years with this? Could I have had it, went down a different road?
Yeah.
They turned around and said, okay, for 2.5 years you've dealt with this. Go, you move your house, get into your house, but you need help. Let's see what that looks like. Instead of turning around and saying, come, put your head on my shoulder, let's walk with this. There is a time and a place for that, but it needs to be conversational. It needs to have, and if you are right, sometimes, but if they're not ready for that conversation, then people around them,
Yeah.
what do we need to do?
You say you don't accept your diagnosis. Why don't you accept it? Because in mental health, with the professionals, it's always a case of you need to accept and own this, are the two terms that I've heard numerous times. So why do you not accept it? And is acceptance not one of those things that people need to do in order to cope better?
I accept the effect it's having on my life. I don't accept it's an illness. I use services. Lots of times I use services to prove them wrong. You know what I mean? I took tablets to prove them wrong. I accept, and like I turned around and said, when I know that it has an impact on my life, I know that I need support, I know that I need stuff around it. People don't need, but I have no say over it, because even if I say to you now, I don't have that, almost falls my face saying I have it. But in my life, I don't need to accept it. But there is a time you've got to turn around and say, but there's something happening. I know where it's coming from. And we won't go into that. I know where it's coming from. Yeah. And I know why it's there. And I know what it's doing. And I know that what I need to do to kind of help me get through the day. But I don't need to accept the diagnosis. And to be honest with you, Carl, if people accept the diagnosis of that's fine. Mm-hmm. This is just Marty Daly.
Okay.
So people trying to say, do you know this? I know what it is now. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll be able to do something with it now. My other thing is, I know what it is, and I know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I know some people will run away from it and turn around and say there was nothing wrong with me. And that's why it's important when we talk about even looking after our own plan for our lives is, if I just had you part of my well-being plan, which is really, really important, and I turn around and say, Carl, there's times that I'll be doing A, B, C, and I know that's a time in my life when things are wobbly. If you see me doing that, I'm giving you permission to let me know. So you may say, Marty, we work with you. Remember you were saying that? Well, I seen you've been touching that an awful lot, or you haven't been able to get up of that chair, or you're not eating as much. Is there something wrong? And I may say, everything's fine. But I would have to go away and turn around and say, I trust Carl. Mm-hmm. I asked him to do that. He's not doing it because he wants control over me. He's told me, he's left it with me. So I have to think now and turn and say, what is happening? Who do I need to help me? Okay. Because the big thing about mental illness, its biggest power over us is isolation. Mm-hmm. It separates us from the people we love and the people we care for no matter what reason it puts into our head. We are people who need people around us, and that's biggest power. And if you look at the symptoms of psychosis, it would turn around and say about that isolation, it would say about taking that away. And even through the likes of schizophrenia, they would turn around and say, for me hearing voices and me smelling and experiencing things, they would be the positive sides of schizophrenia. The negative sides is your low mood, your isolation, you're not looking after yourself. Those are all the negative sides. So there is kind of where you can break those things down.
What's the difference between psychosis and
well, again, without getting into it, and not from a medical background, what they would class as psychosis is that they, because you might have loads of those symptoms, but they might be for a certain amount of time. So when you start to get into the diagnosis when you've had them for a prolonged length of time, people may have a psychosis and end up in hospital and never ever have it again. They may go in twice, never ever have it again. But if you have it for a prolonged length of time, this is where they'd say, oh, this is, you have those symptoms and this is what we think it is. It may be, it could be bipolar disorder. And even when you look at bipolar disorder, you know what I mean, it's a small play.
Go ahead.
Done a small play a long time ago about
Right, okay.
so up to them, it was a very therapeutic environment we went to. So when you went in that bracket and you were out in the fields, you were in the sewing room, you were in the catering room, you were doing all those kind of things. And then when they brought in the medication, and up to then, people turn and say recovery, that's a new thing. Up to the 1940s, when you left Purdysburn or you left the city, you were recovered or in recovery. They used that word on your file.
Okay.
Now you wouldn't see it. So when the 40s came, they started, when you started to be discharged, that word wasn't used again because I had done the research where we had an exhibition around that. So that word started to fade away. So the whole point of that is about, I mean, where does people need to be? So if we turn around and say about acceptance is a big thing, it's not about the acceptance, that acceptance, something needs to happen or something needs to change. And where we get that help from is really, really important. And where we get that honest conversation, because people turn around and say you need to be in hospital, you need somewhere to be safe. I think sometimes the safest place is within a conversation.
Okay. You talk about impact in your life, but what impact might it have on personal relationships, both with wife, children, family?
As I said, the relationship broke with the wife, but I felt it was the right thing for her because I wasn't going to be the husband I wanted to be. I wasn't going to be the person, so we broke, and we still became really, really close friends. My kids, as I said, I thought I was protecting them. It had an effect on them, but they've seen the work that I do. And do you know what it is? I think I'm in it. Well, they can come and talk to me.
Okay.
They come and they can have a talk to me. I didn't know where I would be in relationships because I turned and say, when do you tell people? You know, but I met up with dude up. I met up with my partner, and it was like, and it's not that behind it there's a good woman or a good partner and things change. You know what I mean? It was very acceptance because she'd had want to be on talks and hear me talking about these things, but she still fell in love with me, and I fell in love with her. And when she seen things were getting rough, we had said, "Wait, Marty, let's just calm this down. Let's see what this is. Let's have the do you need A, B, C?" And I was able to have those conversations with her. We didn't agree on all the things. Why would you? We had our things, but she saved my kids are most important thing in my life as well. But she saved me as well. She saved me for what I was. She gave her life to be with me. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And And do you know what I mean? I didn't think I'd be here. I didn't think I'd see my kids grow up. I didn't think I would be able to walk. I thought they'd be walking me down the aisle in a coffin. I didn't think I'd walk my family down the aisle getting married. I've now got 6 grandchildren. You know what I mean? One's 25. You know what I mean? All those kind of things I didn't see because I felt that mental health would take that all away from me. And it it can and it does at times. But I've got to remember the likes of today, I will look at this and turn around and say, when I'm under a lot of stress, I'll turn around and say, wait, Marty, you were talking about this the other day. You were talking about the things you put in place. You need to put those in place. You were talking about what you need to do because there's still times I forget to eat. I don't eat. I mean, it had a big effect on when we eating. So I have an alarm on phone to remind me to eat. All those kind of things that I put in place. What's the sense of having a plan if you're not going to try to keep to it? And if that plan isn't working, you need to sit with someone and work out another plan. Every plan doesn't work for everyone else. And as I progress in my life, illnesses come, all the other things, I need to adjust. You know what I mean? We can't be doing the same 20 press ups that we did 2 years ago, we have to say what we need to be doing. My life within mental health is a journey that I will be following probably for the rest of my days. But there's more to Marty Daly than mental health. And I hope that people see that. And I know that people that I'm with and the people that I talk, I always try to see the person. And I think without going through this experience, I probably would have been naive to that. Mental health has been an education to me. It's been a tough education. It's been a school I wouldn't have wanted to go to. I mean, I wouldn't have signed up. I wouldn't have paid a fee to go to it. But it's been an education. Unless we use our experiences of that education, no matter where if you've been in hospital 2 weeks, if you've gone to the service 2 weeks, we need to use that experience to help us to move on, to see where we are in our life. I'm just blessed that I'm able to sit here today. I don't know what I'll be tomorrow, but none of us do.
Nope.
None of us do, and I've experienced that in the last 6 months with the loss of my partner. We don't know. And again, it's about people turning and saying, oh, he's going to come on well again. Like, how do I deal with grief without people seeing that it's an illness?
Yeah.
And I've been allowed to do that. I've been allowed to deal with grief instead of people saying, because things have got louder, because now I'm in a house where it has more room to grow. It has more to say those things. And they are scary, Carl. I mean, even to come here today, I mean, I've probably been awake for 48 hours.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I need to keep this thing away from having that conversation. And I know I talk in a third person. People tell me, how can you be well when you talk? But that's how I cope.
Yep. Yep.
And what I would say to people is there is life after mental health. It's not that it's away, but you can't walk with it. And what I would say is, please give it a go. Please walk with it, because you're as strong as it is. And that's why I try to eat, because I know now through the experience of not eating that became stronger.
Yeah.
When I wasn't eating, when I wasn't drinking, my body. So the only thing I probably really have control over in my life is about the eating, the drinking, and try to keep a wee bit fit. So those are really important to me. Having conversations with yourself, and it doesn't always be, it's not always about mental health, not mental health. Focused all the time. But just enjoy while it can, because we don't know when that's going to be. We don't know when that darkness is going to come in. But what I do know, and I try to, is the darkness can't always stay there. But sometimes we need people to walk with us just to get through it, and trust them to get us through it. It doesn't make you any weaker. It probably makes you stronger to do that.
Marty, thank you very, very much for sharing your story with us today. Thank you.
It's all over the place, mate. Sorry.